Today I'm going to be covering the final stages of my commercial pilot license. So how I got the physical CPL. And a caveat to this, if you haven't seen the previous videos, this is the UK route and how I got my license in the UK route. And an in-depth analysis as to what to expect for UK commercial pilots when they're starting out on their integrated courses, and even for modular courses. If you are considering the modular route, this might be of use because I'm going to share with you some tips and some tricks that I utilized when I was coming to honing my skills in the flying stages of my training. Now, if you don't know who I am, I'm an airline pilot, and what I do is I help aspiring airline pilots on their journeys towards becoming a pilot. And that being said, hopefully this will provide you with some guidance as to how you can approach your commercial pilot license. Now, first and foremost, the previous video I discussed how I failed my first progress test and then ended up passing it the second time round, having learnt from my mistakes and looking inwardly, introspectively at the mistakes that I had made in order to make sure that I don't make those same mistakes again and I improve upon them. Now, I've got my logbook sat in front of me right now, so I'm looking through in terms of what my next few hours were. By the end of this video, if you do pay attention to the entirety of it, hopefully you'll get some really valuable skills that are going to help you and really fine-tune your flying skills as well. So, as you guys know or don't know, once I finished that first progress test, so I completed it, I then started building a little bit more hours towards my second progress test. However, COVID struck during that period. And what I then ended up having to do was go back to the UK because I was doing my training initially in Arizona in America. And that was where most people were doing their training because the fees, the weather, everything is better in Arizona and in America generally when it comes to flying and general aviation. So what they do, most flight schools, is send you out to America to do your training. And nowadays they utilize some European academies. So some people get sent to Spain and France and other areas. But generally the UK is an expensive place to do your training. However, in the circumstances that we had, because COVID had struck, we were then sent back to the UK. And it was a benefit for me because I wanted to be home with my family. I wanted to be around them. And I was in an environment where I didn't have too much expendable income. So going back home made it a little bit easier financially for me as well. But that being said, it doesn't mean that I wasn't prepared to move out to America. I was still financially and mentally prepared to do my training in America, but I had the opportunity to do it in the UK when COVID struck, and they asked their cadets who would want to stay in the UK to continue their training. And I was one of the few people that said, yeah, I'll stay in the UK, just simply because the financial element was going to be better for me. So I ended up doing a lot of flying out of Oxford Airport. And Oxford Airport is a very nice airport to fly out of because it's very small and it's not busy, and they operate mainly private jets, but equally they operate a lot of single engine aircraft, and it was pretty much a very, very suitable setup for the phase of flying that I was currently in. The only bad part of it, if you are in the UK, visual conditions are an extremely rare commodity. Especially when I was doing my training, which was in the winter months. So I had about 1 or 2 days a month that I could actually fly visually. So as you can imagine, this prolonged my training massively. And this was a really, really difficult phase of training for me because of how prolonged it was. One thing that is really, really important to understand when it comes to flying is it is a skill. The complete bottom line of it is that it's a skill that you have to advance on a consistent and consecutive basis. So flying consistently is always more productive than flying once or twice a month. And this I discuss with a lot of modular students who I talk to, where they try to just do maybe 1 or 2 flights a month. It's very, very difficult to uphold a level of skill when you're only doing 1 or 2 flights a month. The reality is it's better to kind of block your flights and to do at least maybe 2 flights a week if you can, at least. But the ideal situation is flying every single day because you're going to develop those skills. Obviously, it's very, very tiring after a while, so you have to monitor that as well, monitor how tired you're getting, and then if you are getting overworked, then just identify that to the training provider or wherever you're doing your training. Just say, I need to kind of rein it in a little bit. But doing as much as you can is always better, because you'll become more recurrent with all of the flying elements of things, and you're going to become a sharper pilot. You're going to build that muscle memory, and it's super, super important when it comes to the flying stages that you are proficient. And the way to become proficient is by consistent practice. One particular quote that I really like from a book that I read in the past is, practice makes progress. Because as we know, there's the famous saying, practice makes perfect, but the reality is no one can be perfect. Practice makes progress, and by practicing consistently, you're going to make really fast. By practicing consistently, you're going to make very positive progress. So one thing that I would encourage, if you are in your flying stages, try to be on a very consistent basis of flying, and try not to have massive gaps between your flying lessons. Try and have smaller gaps between those flying lessons. Now, another thing that I started to adopt more as well is the airline pilot mindset, because obviously my goal was to get into the commercial world, in the airline world. And one thing that really helped me when it came to sharpening my tools of flying was imagining the aircraft. And this is a really powerful thing, so I hope you're listening to this carefully. And if you don't listen to anything else in this video, just listen to this one bit of information that I'm going to tell you, because it was told to me by an airline pilot and someone that was really far ahead of me, and it resonated and stuck with me for the entirety of my training. One thing that you always need to remember when you're flying the aircraft, whether it's a single engine aircraft, whether it's a microlight aircraft, whatever it is that you're flying, if your goal is to become an airline pilot and you're wanting to fly these big jets, the A380, the A320, whatever you want to fly eventually, I want you to imagine that you're flying that. I want you to imagine that you're flying a big jet, no matter what you're flying, whether it's the microlight, like I said, a glider, whatever it is. Just imagine in your head that you're flying this massive jet, because then you're going to make sure that those inputs that you incorporate into the flight are going to be very sharp, and they're going to be smooth. And that is the key to it, I think. When I started understanding flying a bit more and building more experience with it, I started to think, I want to be smoother with my inputs. I don't want to be too reactive. I want to be actually ahead of the aircraft. And if you are ahead of the aircraft, then your inputs can be smoother. So constantly thinking and being really alert with what you're doing is super important. Now, another thing to add to that when it comes to your flying experience, initially, this isn't going to be easy for you. And it is literally, I don't know if you drive, but if you do drive a car, then it's literally like driving a car. Your brain is going to automatically build a capacity to actually be able to handle all of these things at once. So the first thing that you need to be focusing on is just trying to input very smooth controls. And it's really important that you build upon good habits. One thing that I had when I started out, because of the lack of consistency, was I was starting to develop pretty bad habits in my flying. And so I had to break those habits when it came to actually becoming more consistent with my flying. So really focus on inputting the aircraft with good habits. So start by thinking that you're flying a big aircraft, because if you can provide smooth inputs to the aircraft throughout the entirety of your training, from the start to the finish, if you can provide those smooth inputs in the really early stages, then you're just going to build upon those, and you're just going to make them stronger and stronger. And there's neurons in your head. They're going to get stronger and stronger in this understanding that I'm going to be a smooth operator of this aircraft. And that is important to understand in an early stage of flight. However, as you get more experience and as you become more aware of the aircraft and how to operate it, your capacity is going to widen. If I was to give you the example of driving, when you first start driving, you probably got two hands on the wheel. You're really focused on just making sure that you don't hit the car next to you or the car on the other side. You're really focused on like making sure the driving is straight, kind of thing. And then when you're doing your turns, you're focused on not overturning or oversteering. You're focused on making the right turn. And these things become over time second nature in your brain. This is just a neurological thing for every person. Our body and our brain is really acclimatized to making things automatic. Our brain wants to make things automatic because it offers energy conservation. Our body is constantly looking for energy conservation. I don't know if you've ever worked in any retail job or anything, any kind of job. But you'll find over time, the first instance, you're training and you're doing things, but over time, you're going to find shortcuts and ways to automate things, to make things easier for you. So, for example, when I was on the tills, when I was doing supermarket work in our local supermarkets, I was handing stuff across the tills. Initially, I was always like focused on where the barcode was, like trying to scramble for it. But then it got to the point, because I'd done it so many times, it was just like I knew where the barcodes were. So I was like scanning things across. And if you've ever been to Lidl or Aldi in the UK, you're going to see these guys are like absolute machines swiping the items across like it's no man's business. And that's what you want to build in your brain. You want to build this resilience to actually have capacity to do other things, but that comes with practice and repetition. So when you're starting out, your brain is going to be focused on one individual task at a time. So what you need to try and do is focus on perfecting that task and giving your brain a chance to automate it. So really focus on building good habits, because when you build those good habits, your brain will start automating those good habits, and then you can build upon those good habits with more and more useful skills and useful bits of input. And to draw it back to driving, if you do drive, then initially, like I said, you're going to be holding two hands on the steering wheel, but over time, you're going to start realizing it becomes second nature. Your brain is going to build this automatic response to driving. So it will come over time where you've got, and this I don't advise, but you might have one hand on the wheel, one hand on the gear stick, and then you've got the radio playing, and you're listening to the music, and you're singing along with the music, and you're having a coffee with one of the other hands. I mean, you've only got two hands, but when one of the other hands leaves the gear stick, you're grabbing your coffee, having a drink, and then you're looking around outside as well whilst you're driving in a straight line. All of these things can then start happening automatically, because your brain has built a resilience to actually understanding that you can utilize and you can trust that your brain knows what to do in that situation. And that is the same with flying. So obviously we're not going to have drinks and do all of these things whilst we're flying. We're still going to be focused on what we're doing. However, we want to build that resilience and build that understanding that we want to automate these good habits. So we want to automate these smooth inputs. And it's really important from the early stages that you understand that inputting the aircraft with the idea that you're flying a big jet is super valuable when it comes to flying and operating an aircraft effectively and efficiently. But that was in the early stages of my training. So to move on from that, I did some flights in the UK. I did my cross country in the UK, which basically means you go to an airport, you stop at that airport, and then you go to another airport. And it's basically, there's a whole curriculum and a requirement to follow when it comes to your cross country, which I won't go into too much detail on because it would then get confusing. But you have to follow that curriculum. And with the integrated route, the beauty of it is that it's all done for you. So you can just, as long as you do what the instructors tell you, then you're going to get the license that you need. I will in future cover a modular route so that you guys get an understanding, if you are modular students, as to exactly what to expect. I'm just building that actually at the moment. So just stay tuned to this channel, subscribe to the channel, and make sure that you are up to date with it, because eventually I will upload a video explaining the entire full in-depth analysis of the modular route so that it can help you guys as well. That being said, I carried on with my flight training. I had to build my hours because you need a certain amount of hours before you can even sit the CPL test. I then got to around a year and a half later, and that's how long it took me to build those hours for the visual flying stages. I did my night rating, so that involved doing some night flying to allow me to then operate at nighttime, basically. I did that during that CPL phase, and then it got to the end where I was really tight on my restrictions in terms of my ATPLs. So one thing about the ATPL exams is the date that you finish your last exam, you have 3 years to complete your training before you have to repeat all of those exams again, because they will expire. So I was becoming really close to that time frame. I had about 10 months from the date that I had finished one of my last single engine flying flights. I think it was one of my night rating flights. I had about 10 months to complete the entire rest of my training. So the instrument rating, the MCC, the UPRT, and the multi-engine phase of my CPL. And all these licenses might get confusing for people that don't know what they are, which is absolutely fine. I'm going to go through them as well as we go along in this series. But what I ended up having to do was going back to America because the weather just wasn't good enough to continue the CPL training. It was the winter time of 2022, where this was, sorry, 2021, where this was starting to get a little bit more difficult to get the flying hours in, because the winter was just, like I said, you only get about 1 day in a month that's really clear skies in the UK. And we were doing our best to scale and navigate through this weather that was ultimately really, really bad for us to operate in terms of a lesson and student environment. We want to be in an environment that we don't have to really worry about the weather. So they sent us back to America to complete the final stages of our training and expedite us. Specifically us, as in the guys that were in the UK doing their training, because it wasn't just me. There was a few other guys that were also in a similar position where the training was just getting delayed and delayed. And I didn't personally mind because I was with my family. I was enjoying it. The only caveat and the only thing I didn't want to do was have to repeat my ground school exam. So it was starting to build a bit of stress in my mind that I did not want to lapse those exams. So I was starting to apply pressure to myself to just complete the training as soon as I can. And the reason I didn't mind as well was because at the time there wasn't really any jobs anyway. So I was thinking to myself, as long as I can delay this till when there are going to be jobs available, then it's absolutely fine. I'm not in a rush to finish, because there were guys that were finishing and they had their licenses, but because there was no jobs, they couldn't apply for anything. So they had to even revalidate their licenses and spend even more money doing the tests again and doing their CPL tests and their IR tests again to get them revalidated and updated. And I didn't really want to do that. I just thought to myself, I'm just going to prolong this as long as I can. However, it was getting very, very tight towards the end. That being said, they sent us to America to finish our multi-engine phase of our commercial pilot license. So what that means is we were flying aircrafts with 2 engines rather than 1 engine, which is what I was used to for the longest of times. And that was in itself a transitionary period as well. Now, one thing, if you are switching from single engine to multi-engine, one thing to really, really get your grip around and your head to comprehend is the asymmetry element of multi-engine aircraft. Really, really start utilizing your rudder pedals. I don't think I really even used my rudder pedals when I was doing my single engine phase of flying. So that's another thing. Really focus on, when you are in your early stages, trying to maintain directional control with your rudder pedals is really important from an early stage as well, because you're going to build your body, your habits in your body to utilize your legs, if you see what I mean. Because then when you go into multi-engine, if you've utilized your rudder pedals effectively from the start, then when it comes to the multi-engine phase and you're thinking about the axis and the asymmetry of an aircraft, then what that involves is really, really utilizing the rudder pedals. So if you're in a position where you've done that for since the start of your training, then when it comes to actually in the multi-engine phase of your training, you're going to be really attuned with utilizing the rudder pedals to counteract any asymmetry, which is what you're eventually going to be tested on in the CPL test. Especially if it's a multi-engine CPL test, you're going to be tested on asymmetry, and if one engine is inoperative, what you're going to do, which is essentially utilize the rudder pedals to maintain directional control. And that also translates to the airline world as well, because we are tested on a regular basis as to engine failures. And as you guys can probably imagine, with an engine failure comes asymmetry. So utilizing the rudder pedals from an early stage is really, really important, because like I said, it's going to build those habitual good habits for you, so that in the back of your mind, your automated response to any directional deviations is going to be to utilize your legs, not necessarily just the ailerons. Now, I hope that this video has been of some use. I managed to pass my commercial pilot license first time, which was just due to really, really effective practices and methods that I used in my training. And if you're interested in working with me and understanding the methods that I used, then feel free to book in a call with myself through the link in the description. I'll be more than happy to help you. But that being said, I passed my CPL test, and the next stage was my instrument rating. And one thing I really stress massively to a lot of people that I speak to is I found the instrument rating to be one of the hardest parts of my entire life. And that was due to a number of factors, but I will discuss those factors in the next video so that you guys get an in-depth analysis of why I found that specifically the most difficult, because not necessarily everybody finds it the most difficult, but I personally did. And that was due to a number of factors. I hope that you did enjoy this video. If you could do me a massive favor, just leave a like on this video. Subscribe to my channel, like I said, because I'm going to be continuing to post really useful information. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon.